universities, and now they're mainly being privatized, and students have to get private loans and take on massive debt to afford their university education. In the area of genetic knowledge, companies like Monsanto are patenting genes in something like corn that's evolved over thousands of years. They insert a few genes, claim patent rights, and then bankrupt Indian farmers who have to commit suicide because they can't afford the seeds and it's illegal to save seeds. So I just wanted to summarize the enclosure of the commons, which is a huge issue currently and is really the main theme of neoliberalism, which is concentrating wealth. And this leads us to solution for basic income, which I want to get into next. So there's essentially three different methods for financing basic income: taxes, central bank credit, what used to be called social credit, and economic rent on the commons. The method of using taxes creates problems because people start questioning who's deserving, who isn't deserving. You're transferring wealth from one group to another group, and it gets into all kinds of ethical and normative problems. It sounds like a Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. So it's problematic. But some of the methods are taxing wealth, income, or sales, combined with elimination of some means-tested social welfare programs and consolidating them. You could have financial transaction taxes, or a Tobin tax, or you could have taxes on natural resources and pollution. For central bank credit, it's essentially quantitative easing for the people. Instead of issuing money to the banks, you issue it directly to citizens, what Ben Bernanke called helicopter money, which of course has never happened. The third method, and the one that I advocate, is the collection of economic rent on the commons and giving it to the public instead of privatizing the rent. And this includes natural assets and social assets. But eventually it comes down to whose ox are you going to gore? Somebody's going to have to pay for it. And will they fight back? Perhaps the ox will gore you instead. I've gotten a lot of inspiration from Peter Barnes. He wrote a book called Capitalism 3.0, which talks about collecting rent from the commons and paying dividends. And that is essentially the approach that I favor, because if the commons is our property, then you're not getting into an argument about stealing from the rich and giving to the poor like Robin Hood. If we all collectively own the commons, then we have the right to collect the rent. So what is economic rent? Economic rent is the unearned income above and beyond the cost of production. And that includes normal profit. So if we use the example of oil, if we take the price spike in 2008, when oil was $147 a barrel, and you look at the cost of production of oil in various countries, including profit, you see there's a massive amount of unearned income that comes from the ownership, from basically from $57 to $125 a barrel, just in basically unearned income, free money from just the ownership of the asset because it's been privatized. And that applies to many different types of industries and different types of assets where the price is far higher than the production cost due to monopoly or scarcity or various reasons. And so the amount of rent could be calculated. There's two basic theories of economic rent. One is called the liberal theory of rent, which is essentially neoliberalism. It says that the commons should be privatized and it should all be kept by corporations and private individuals. The other theory is the democratic theory of rent, which I subscribe to, which says that these resources are essentially public property and that governments should collect the rent to benefit the public since they own it in first place. The oil companies didn't put the oil in the ground, so essentially it's inherently public property, and we should be able to collect the rent. And that's the basis for a basic income. Here's a great example of this type of basic income based on the collection of rent on natural resources, which is the Alaska Permanent Fund. And the oil on state land goes into a fund which collects interest, and the interest is used to pay dividends to the population of Alaska, between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. And this model has been written about in a book called Exporting the Alaska Model by Whitequist and Howard. And you can expand this idea beyond just oil to include other resources. And this we did in Vermont, and we included air as a sink for waste, and wildlife and fisheries, forests, groundwater, surface water, minerals, land value, wind power, the internet and the World Wide Web, the broadcast electromagnetic spectrum, the financial and monetary system. And when you collect the economic rent on these resources, these common assets, you ended up with between $1,900 and $10,300 US dollars per person per year for the basic income based on economic rent. We submitted this idea to the legislature, and we even printed a check to symbolize the amount of money that everyone should receive. Recently, this calculation was done for Australia using a larger number of natural and social assets. This was done by Karl Fitzgerald of Prosper Australia in 2013. And we took his calculation of total economic rent and subtracted existing revenue in order not to take away any money from existing programs. And when we did this, we ended up with about 12,000 Australian dollars per person per year for basic income in Australia. And I'll go through some of the different assets and some of the calculations that were used to come up with this number. There are three basic categories. There's economic rent on land and resources. He calculated the annual increase in land value was about 6 or 7%. So he used 5.5% for land, residential land, 6.5% for commercial. Mineral royalties of 40%, and the progressive resource rent tax on oil and gas also at 40%. And you can argue with these percentages, but you can do your own calculations. These are the ones that Karl Fitzgerald used for Australia. And economists can certainly differ on what legitimate economic rent is, but it's very difficult to get this kind of proprietary information from companies, so we have to leave. Another category are natural monopolies, and Karl used the electromagnetic spectrum and basically the stock market, which creates a value in addition, excess of the company value due to the stock market itself. Water rights, utilities, airport rights, taxi licenses, fishing, forestry, and so forth. And each one has a different method used. And you can ask me about each one if you'd like to later. And then finally, some sort of state-of-the-art issues: domain net registration, patents, satellite orbits, internet infrastructure, and banking licenses. Currently, the banking system has been privatized, but it should be a public utility, and so those fees were based on that concept. And if you add it all together, it comes out to $12,000 Australian dollars per person per year in Australia. And any country can analyze their own resources and what the total rent amounts to and calculate a basic income from that total amount of economic rent on the commons. Thank you very much.
All right, now we're going to go ahead and give Gary a call. Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Can you see me? Because all I see is your photo.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine as long as you can hear and see me.
Okay, fantastic. So, yeah, we can all hear you just fine. So, we have a few questions here today. We can start with some of the Slido questions, and then if anybody has any questions in the audience, feel free to raise your hand. Let me turn this speaker down because I'm getting echo. Okay, so the one that we have, yes.
I've read all the Slido questions.
Okay, great. So you're prepared.
Yeah, I can start answering them if you want.
Sure. So for the audience, the first one that we'll ask is: would QE for the people produce inflation?
Okay, so these are all really excellent questions. The first presentation I ever did on basic income was kind of a warning. If you give people a basic income, you're going to have to watch out for housing prices going up, and that would be the most immediate type of inflation that you would see. So you have to, and that answers the second question also, which is you have to do something about housing prices, and if you start collecting higher land rent, you're going to reduce the increase in housing prices. So you can accomplish both of those things by collecting the rent on land.
So, does anybody have in the audience? Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question? If not, we can continue with the Slido questions.
And then the other answer to that question, which relates to some of the other questions, is it's more or less a redistribution. It's not so much an increase in prices. It's